Regarding men, number 34. Hanna, Rosin, and Maureen Dowd hate men.
Well, hello to everyone. Here we are, and I have a new microphone, so we're hopefully going to have better sound than we've had in the past. I am Janice Fiamengo of the Fiamengo File, and I'm here with Tom Golden of Men Are Good, and also with Paul Elam of A Voice for Men and an Ear for Men. And we are discussing something that is not brand new, and I remember when this happened, but I have to admit that I never watched this particular debate because I knew it would make me angry and upset. But then we decided, let's talk about it, because although this is now a number of years old, we're going to talk about the Munk debate, which is a semi-annual debate that takes place in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And it's sponsored by a wealthy benefactor, a couple whose last name is Munk, I think. So they are supposed to be set up, these debates, to allow experts to debate important policy issues. Now, this particular subject had really nothing whatsoever. No one mentioned public policy, and in fact, none of the so-called experts have any kind of knowledge of public policy or interest in it, or any expertise, as far as I could tell, in politics, in economics, in technology, in engineering, in anything really relevant to the subject. They are all, I guess, journalists, pundits, wordsmiths. But the subject of the debate was, be it resolved, men are obsolete. And so we had four women, of course, talking about whether men are obsolete and not finding anything embarrassing or shameful or ridiculous about that. In fact, one of them at one point, I think Caitlin Moran, said that the fact that women were, men should be grateful to them for stepping forward to discuss this important subject. And this was yet another example of how men were somehow missing in action in our modern society, that they weren't there talking about the fact that they're obsolete. So it was four women on the side, on the yes side, that men are indeed obsolete. This is just a fact of life and we better get used to it. Were two women named, the first one is Hanna Rosin. She's the author of a book called The End of Men. I have to admit, I never read it. I kind of wish I had now. And the second person on the pro side arguing that men are obsolete is someone named Maureen Dowd, a journalist who's also written a book called Are Men Necessary? That, I must admit, I have no desire to ever read another word written by Maureen Dowd. The other two sort of on the no, men are not obsolete side, although that wasn't actually clear to me in most of the discussion. Of course, our stalwart Camille Paglia, whom many of us know and love for her inimitable style and her stutter gun speech habits. The only person, I thought, who actually tried to address the topic and actually make an argument about men's role in ancient and modern societies. And someone named Caitlin Moran, or Moran, I'm not sure which, I can't remember now, who is a British woman, I guess a journalist. I have to admit, I'd never heard of her. I didn't investigate her. It wasn't clear to me that she was defending men in any way or even interested really very much in men. But so these four debated the topic, and sort of, yeah. The one thing that I took away from this entire thing, sorry, there's something funny happening on my screen and I have to click it away if I can there.
Can't have that.
Can't have that. But before we get started, we did want to just mention that at the same time as we were all suffering terribly watching the incoherent and, often smug and frivolous and contemptible series of conversations about men. At the very same time, we saw on Facebook something that made us all chuckle, which was a recording of a near serious elk attack in a park in California that was caught on video and, of course, posted to Facebook, which an elk, bunch of tourists getting too close to elks during mating season, and one of the elk charged at the one of the women, and we were not particularly astounded, but somewhat amused and affirmed in our skeptical perspectives on the culture wars that the conversation underneath that Facebook video consistently focused on the failure of the men present to step in to defend the woman, to risk their own lives, perhaps to sacrifice their lives for this woman. And wasn't this shameful that the men had not done so? So at least for the commentators under the Facebook video, men are not quite obsolete yet. They're still disposable bodies to be laid down on the altar of the protection of women. So, that, of course, was never mentioned by any of our debaters, who maundered on, often quite incoherently, about the usefulness or lack of usefulness of men, and whether we should feel sorry for men or whether we should blame men, and all of this kind of thing. And before I open up the floor, I just wanted to say that there are two things that really bothered me about the premise of the debate. It seemed to me actually there were two linked premises. One was that the entirety of civilization to date was built by men, which I agree with, but it was said that it was built by men for men, and that therefore somehow, whatever men are going to get now, whatever marginalized, disempowered, whatever role they're going to have to adopt now, it's their own fault because they built civilization for men. We, of course, totally disagree with that. Men built civilization. They cooperated with other men to build it. They built it for women and children. It's ridiculous to say men built civilization for other men. The other linked premise was that the present rise of women is a very recent thing, and it's something that women can take complete responsibility for. And that therefore, women can congratulate themselves for their now, increasing dominance in society, which anyone who has studied, who's read newspapers over the last 40 years knows is absolutely not true. Women have begged men, demanded of men, excoriated men, blamed men, and demanded that men do something for women, get more women into STEM, get more women into positions as CEOs, do something about the wage gap, hire more women, practice affirmative action, all of these things, get more women into academia, get more women into professorship positions. We even now still have positions being held open solely for women. This is not something that has happened naturally. It's not something that has happened because women have simply proven themselves to be the more successful and effective sex. This is something that has been a massive project of feminist social engineering with men's active support or complicity, one might say. So this is not something that women should be congratulating themselves for and pitying the poor men for simply being ill-equipped to keep up with the demands of modern society, which a number of the debaters in that debate did actually infer or state explicitly. And so the fundamental dishonesty underlying the debate and on display, as these women went on in their various verbal directions, was pretty disgusting.
Disgusting indeed.
What do you think, Tom?
Oh my gosh, the whole thing, it was just amazing, Janice. They never said one word about affirmative action.
Right.
Which is what you're talking about. All of this cultural push for women. No, they didn't say one word about affirmative action. And in fact, I don't think this was a debate at all. I think this was a feminist gossip fest. Because even Polya was pretty much a feminist. She said some nice things about men, but geez, the moderator talked about the patriarchy. In the last half, they talked about Miley Cyrus more than they talked about anything else. It's like, what the hell? This wasn't a debate. This was they're talking about, Miley Cyrus. This is bullshit. Just bullshit. It's just sad. And some of the things they said during this thing were so incredibly wrong and what's the word for it? Men are confused by anything that isn't them. That's one of the things that Rosin said. Men are confused by anything that isn't them. Oh my
Projection,
God.
folks. It's not just a room in the back of the theater.
And then ask blue-collar women why they're not living with their husbands. And women say, oh, he would just be another mouth to feed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh.
No.
And this kind of crap was speckled throughout the whole gossip fest. And with no one to bring a counterpoint. No one. I mean, Polly did a little bit, but really, it was four of them. And the guest speakers that they'd bring in, they'd stop the debate for a while and they'd bring in this on the screen, this speaker that was pre-recorded, all women, probably all feminists. I mean, it was a one-sided show. It was just one-sided. It wasn't a debate. So don't watch it, guys, unless you want some humor. Because really, if you can look at it from a humor perspective, it's pretty freaking funny, But otherwise, pretty worthless. I mean, these people, how did they get degrees?
Yeah.
I think there was value in it, though. I mean, for us in the analysis, one of the things that I think deserves to be mentioned in this is probably for the third time, is that this wasn't a debate. This was 90 minutes of erroneous assumptions about men and about women in society. I will note that Caitlin Morin, Janice, she actually did defend one man, Karl Marx.
Yeah, right. That's exactly right.
And I thought, how ironic, here's this Marxist who put their Marxism above everything, even in terms of how she frames a discussion on gender. And Palea, to her credit, identified as a capitalist in this outwardly, which actually kind of surprised me. I think maybe she did that because she knew Morin. I keep wanting to say moron, but I know that's totally juvenile and inappropriate to say.
Oh,
but her take on this as a supposed defender of men was that capitalism and free markets, which men built, were the enemy. If that's my friend, I really don't want to. And then again, there's Palea, who I think is brilliant. I really do. She is. I mean, I tried to read Sexual Persona and got about halfway through it and was like, my brain was going to break. This woman is so bright and so in depth about her writing, but she also is very gynocentric.
Yes.
I thought of the commenters in the elk video. It made me think of Palea, that she would be one of the ones in the comments saying, what are wrong with the men that are not standing up to a bull elk? Folks, have you ever seen a bull elk? That is not something anybody in their right mind stands up to. I want to point out the most aggravating points for me in this. One was Maureen Dowd's voice.
Yeah, really? Oh, God. That was
guys,
annoying.
look, take my word for it. You can go down, there's a link below if you want to listen to Maureen Dowd drone like an overstuffed secretary with a shallow life for a few minutes. You're welcome to do it. She had absolutely nothing to say on topic. She was correct when she came out and said, I've never debated before, I'm screwed. She was
That's correct.
She has no idea what she's talking about. She basically turned her participation in this into making stupid jokes about politics that weren't even very funny.
Yeah, and
Hanna
it seemed like...
Go ahead,
Paul.
Well, I just wanted to point out that Hanna Rosin's, my point of contention with her is that, as we discussed before we started today, she very slickly at the end tried to frame the end of men as something to be alarmed about. Yet the gloating about the end of men was dripping from her every sentiment throughout the entire discussion. And I have read her book, Janice, and it drips with condescension and gloating about the harm coming to men and boys in this culture. And now she wants to go out at the end and put a little Band-Aid on that turd and say, oh, we're really concerned about men. Nobody on that stage in 90 minutes was concerned about men and boys that I could tell.
Not one time.
Yeah.
The needs of men weren't even considered.
No, and certainly absolutely no solutions offered.
No.
That's the other thing. I mean, I did find that so striking that throughout her entire opening presentation, Hanna Rosin smiled broadly, smirked, giggled, was smug, just felt so good as she gave all of these anecdotes and some facts, such as the fact that a young single woman's median salary is now higher than a young single man's median salary. She brought forward statistics like that, although mostly it was sort of anecdotal. And she was so pleased. And then I found it absolutely bizarre later on in the conversation when she and Camille Paglia very briefly agreed that there is a boy crisis, that it's been talked about for a long time. They didn't mention Warren Farrell once, although I would think he's the person with whom that phrase should be most indelibly associated. They did mention Christina Hoff Sommers, who's obviously has written very informatively about that subject, but feminist, and they mentioned this boy crisis and agreed it was something serious, but that was it. Then they went on back to mocking. I mean, the inability to maintain a sustained focus on the actual problems of boys and men was really striking, and for me, so telling. The lack of empathy, the scorn. I mean, they alternated between, sort of glib triumphalism. This is something men have done to themselves because, of course, men are responsible for all bad things that happen. So there was glib triumphalism, there was scornfulness, there was occasionally, a kind of quick bit of pity. There was deflection of any sort of responsibility on women. A number of occasions, Hanna Rosin said that, look, this is just a fact of life. It doesn't help us to deny the facts of life, as if men somehow are in denial about the fact that, that there are problems in the world for men. It was so, the cognitive dissonance, it's overwhelming. Whenever men try to talk about these problems, their voices are quashed. Yep. They're mocked, they're derided, they're called woman haters. And yet, on a number of occasions, these women spoke as if men themselves are their own worst enemies, in that they won't admit that anything is wrong in modern society. And so here are Hanna Rosin and the others doing them a huge favor by recognizing it, although recognizing it in a way that is most often, contemptuous and scornful, or simply gleeful. And that was the other thing, is that there were absolutely no solutions offered. And if this is the future of the ascendancy of woman, I think it's all there in this debate. They're poor debaters. They're not interested in argument. They never argued with one another, even though they were supposed to be on opposite sides. Occasionally, Camille Paglia did. But as soon as there was a suggestion that they actually disagreed, they would come around to, in some way, agreeing, or just making a joke out of it, laughing and nodding at some a funny thing one of the people had said. They were all over the place in terms of subject matter. They were unable to maintain a kind of linear through line in their discussion. They were always swerving off to talk about feminism, either the successes or failures of feminism, or what feminism needs to do, or why feminism was better in the 60s and why it's now gone off track, and all these kinds of things. Or indeed to talk about how the workplace needs to continue to change to make it more attractive to women, even though this was supposed to be a conversation about men. It was, to me, it summed up the weaknesses of women who assume so glibly and so without understanding that all of civilization was simply grew up in a natural kind of way. All they think about when they think about everything we have is men dominating women, women being kept out of this thing. And they imagine that it can somehow all be kept going in exactly, you know, as efficiently as it is, as with the incredible productive power and the incredible ability to invent and create and build that men have brought to this world. They imagine that can all be kept going, but it'll be so much better when women are at the helm, because women, of course, are peace-loving and egalitarian and everything else. And, you know, just the lack of understanding of the complexity of our world.
Right.
Well,
Exactly.
wasn't that represented so well with Hanna Rosin and her obvious detachment from whatever goes on outside, you know, as though there's an air conditioning fairy that brings cool air into the room.
Yeah.
And these things don't require men to build them, and the waste in the toilet, there's a fairy that comes and takes all that away. Because she doesn't see, you can tell she is absolutely detached from what created the very surroundings she was sitting in.
Yeah.
It's as though all those men, and she was sitting in the work of men.
Mm-hmm.
And not aware of it. You could tell she had no awareness whatsoever, as though there, you know, were magicians that waved their wand and buildings were erected, and she was able to move into them. I found that absolutely stunning, the
Mm-hmm.
lack of self-awareness
Yes.
in her about that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was on par, and it made me think again of the elk video. One, I have to point out that elk was going after a man first. Nobody noticed because he was the first one to dive over the Jersey barrier. And nobody noticed that it was actually the guy that the elk was attacking. And then when the elk got to the spot where the man jumped over, there was a woman there. And so the elk changed target there. But nobody noticed the guy that was running for his life. And this is where, again, we have a great difficulty with these discussions. I looked in the comments at all the ones throwing insults. Oh, these cowardly men, they wouldn't, you know, stand up to a charging bull elk. And they were almost all of them coming from women. The only one I found from a guy was saying, doesn't anybody have concealed carry? But he wasn't talking about men necessarily. He wanted to know if nobody had a gun.
Yeah.
But all of these comments are coming from women about what's wrong with men, that they won't die for a stranger. Nobody had any idea whether this woman was Mother Teresa or a crack whore. There's no difference. And the guy diving in to protect him may have been a scumbag from hell, or he may have been a man with 6 children to feed.
Yeah.
And he's still supposed to sacrifice his life for that. And it's that same detachment of humanity that I saw on the stage in the debate.
Exactly.
This absolute lack of any awareness whatsoever as men of human beings. So when Janice says it's hard to have these discussions because they're accused of misogyny, part of the reason is that we have a problem with women in this culture. And I'm not just saying women are innately flawed or anything like that, but the way we socialize them, our rules of conduct around women, our social edicts that are in place now about women, about a man can't talk about his problems. Imagine what would happen if we had a laughing, joking, sneering discussion about female genital mutilation, and then said at the end, oh, but it's probably a problem. Maybe somebody ought to look at it.
Yeah.
The outrage would be complete.
Yeah. And it would never happen. That's it. It would never happen. Not because the outrage, it's because it just wouldn't happen. Men don't think in those terms about women. They do not, for all of the accusations of patriarchal indifference and, you know, sexual violence and objectification and everything else. Men don't think in those terms about women. We would not have a 4-panel male debating team laughing at the problems of women and thinking that it was somehow appropriate to sit around and talk about whether women are obsolete or not. I mean, it's absolutely unimaginable. And it isn't just because of, the reason we have a culture that is gynocentric is precisely because men are like that. Men care about women's problems.
Yes, exactly.
And at the end, when Maureen Dowd, I think she maybe realized, no, not Maureen Dowd, sorry, Hanna Rosin, when she kind of realized, I better, clean this up a little bit, all my laughing and everything. I better say to men, look, we're not happy about the fact that you're obsolete. But the best thing she could come up with, the person who sent me this video was particularly, disgusted by this. The best thing that she could come up with was this analogy to bicycles. I guess maybe she's thinking of the old Gloria Steinem quote, but
yes, we still want to use them.
Yeah. Imagine saying that. We still want to use you. You are obsolete. You were made obsolete by the steam engine or whatever, but we still want to use you, but we just want to retool you in ways that will make you, more attractive to us and more useful to us. The mind boggles. I
know. I think it was Dowd who said, rather than being old, boring necessity, you're now a luxury like ice cream.
Yeah.
She's saying that to men. It's like, what?
Wow.
The lack of compassion is just absolutely overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the objectification in this is just strident.
Yeah, here's another one. Try on a frilly apron over your wife beater shirt.
Oh, yeah.
See how fetching looks while you go fetch.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, talking about men as if they're dogs. Go fetch.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah, and
it's not just a lack of compassion, it's hatred.
It is, yeah.
This is really hatred.
Masking as humor and wit.
Exactly.
And and this it works. They won the debate.
Everyone applauds. Everyone applauds.
There was a lot of applause, and they had a 28%. What's the word?
Increase.
20%, changed their minds and voted on the pro side that indeed men are obsolete. Although no actual argument was ever made about why.
Exactly.
It was,
and that's an interesting point, Janice, and that is that at the very beginning, the people who came to the debate had to fill out a little survey, and 82% of them agreed that men are not obsolete. 18% said that men were obsolete. And then once the thing was over and they all decided whether the pro-obsolete or anti-obsolete won, they all changed to believe that men actually were obsolete.
Wonder how that poll result would turn out if you brought a charging bull elk into the picture.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Well, and to give her due, although I was very disappointed in Palia because I think she couldn't maintain a focus. But those were her. I mean, she didn't manage to ever keep to her time. Talk about like a basic failure on the part of most of these women to actually address the topic, to address the arguments the other panelists are making or not making, and even just to stick to the rules, to stay within the time. That was part of the problem with Palia. She never finished any of the arguments she was making, but she did begin by saying that if men are obsolete, women will be extinct. And explaining why, and really, and focusing far too briefly, I think, and not coherently, but focusing on men's work and the value of that, and the fact that that is so easily neglected in our culture at large, and certainly amongst the panelists. That final person, that Catlin, she's looking forward to a future. Oh, we're just beginning this experiment where we can reimagine gender and we can reimagine society. And I'm so excited. She has absolutely no idea what it takes to keep a civilization together. It's just so obvious.
Sometimes I wonder if Palia does.
Yeah.
One of the things that really bothered me is, yes, she came out and said in the beginning that if men were obsolete, then women would be extinct. And fair thing to say. Unfortunately, it was all downhill from there.
Yes, it's true.
And she never once confronted the bigotry in that room.
I know.
Never once. In
Nobody
any
did.
meaningful way. No, the audience didn't. The audience was swayed. And so we're not just talking about four feminists
That's right.
with a hateful view of men. We're talking about our whole culture with this, which is really what upset me the most
Yes, me
about the
too.
debate.
Yep.
About the giggling over suffering.
Yes.
As long as it's happening to men.
Yes.
Very awful. What can I say?
Yeah, really just.
And the lies
absolutely
that were spread. I mean, they just lied and lied and lied, and no one said a word. One of them, I think it was Caitlin, said, "Ladies, remember how upset we were when men said we were obsolete?"
Yeah.
Wait a minute. No
When
one
did
said
they say
women were
that?
obsolete. That
That's-
never, ever happened. Then she went on how those millennia of men treating women like second-class citizens.
Yeah.
It's just lies.
But hear me out on this. There is a contingent of men out there, part of them in my audience, that are dreaming of artificial wombs and sexual robotics because they want women to be obsolete. And look, guys
Can you
like
blame
this
them?
born, they're made. And they're living in a society where the idea of artificial wombs and sex robots and sex dolls and virtual pornography and everything else is actually more appealing to them than dealing with the kind of women that are on that stage.
Yes.
And so,
yes.
yeah, I think that, you know, if we're not careful as a society, we're going to have a growing contingent of men who see women as an artifact of the past that are no longer worth bothering with. And I think that will be a sad day for our species.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, it sure will be. But and this is a very useful artifact because it shows exactly why a thinking, sensitive man might well allow his anger and bitterness to drive him to that. Because if these are supposed to be intelligent, culture makers, opinion makers, pundits, thinkers, and this is the best they can do, and with an audience laughing along with them, and the moderator praising them for their wit and their insight and their acuity. Wow. So this is what we've come to as a society. Women laughing at men's supposed irrelevancy and men's struggles.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine if it was the other way around.
Yeah.
Couldn't imagine it,
Absolutely not. Yeah.
Just like Janice said, it never enters men's minds.
Right. It doesn't even come in.
Doesn't.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Well,
we didn't talk about who we're giving awards to.
Oh God, I forgot all about that.
Forgot all about that.
Who gets the humanitarian?
Nobody on that stage.
Can we skip it for a week?
Can we give it to the elk?
Oh God, who goosed the most?
I tell you what, I'm at a loss in this sad picture of things. I am at a loss, and what this said about our society, not just these four feminists,
yes, exactly,
and not just the commenters on Facebook, but about all the hundreds of upvotes they got for shaming men. I think our society doesn't deserve a humanitarian award right now. So I'd say we skip it.
Yeah.
Skip it. I like that.
Yeah.
Puda goes to who?
There's so few options. What am I trying to say? Well, why don't we each give a nominee and then decide?
Boy, mine would be Dowd. Just the worst. Unthinking, lacking compassion.
Wouldn't that be the shallow, stupid Puto award?
Oh yeah, we could change it just for this week. Flying
Okay,
shallow, stupid award.
My vote is going to be for Rosin, mainly because she had the audacity to feign concern for men as a way to put a ribbon on her hate and bigotry at the end.
I think I have to agree that I mean, it's, yeah, choosing the best of the worst. I think Rosin maybe was really, I found her hypocrisy
Yeah.
just appalling,
Yeah.
smiling and laughing as she talks about men being irrelevant to the modern world. And then at the end, having the gall to say, oh, I'm not happy about that.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
That's
yeah.
true. So you could put Rosin up a step because of her deviousness.
I also saw a video several years ago when The End of Men came out, and when the Atlantic published the lengthy article version of it in their magazine, a video of her talking to her son and husband,
Right.
and shutting her son down over and over again as he was trying to be heard.
Yep.
And I was honestly enraged watching this.
I remember.
Not only does she deserve the Puto award, she's a horrible mother.
Okay.
That's abusive toward her son.
So we'll make it 3 votes for Rosin.
Okay.
She'll be flying in no time.
I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure too.
And then please tell her to fly the hell out.
Will do.
Well, I am glad I watched it. I remember now discussions about it. And I remember Karen Strawn did a kind of rebuttal response to it that was wonderful, as everything that Karen does is. And I knew that I didn't want to watch it because I knew it would just be an exercise in frustration and irritation and anger. And it was awful, but sometimes it's good to remind oneself of what we're up against, really. Yeah.
And that's a good point. What we're up against. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
On that note, men
are
good.
And we'll see you guys next time for another upbeat, cheerful discussion.
All right. We'll see you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.